Chapter 10, Part B, Form, Meaning, and Use 1, Relative Clauses. Think critically about meaning and use. Let's match the examples with the statements below. Number 1, A. Point to the one which is on the list. B. Point to the one who is on the list. Which sentence is about a person? That's right, sentence B. Point to the one who is on the list refers to a person. This sentence is about a book. That's A. Point to the one which is on the list. Use who for a person. Use which not for a person but for a thing. Number 2. These are the students you need to call. B. These are the students who need to call you. Which one means you have to make some calls? That's sentence A. These are the students you need to call. Which sentence means some students have to make some calls? That's this one, B. These are the students who need to call you. Number 3, A. Our TV, which is broken, is in the family room. 3B. Our TV, which is broken, is in the family room. Which one means we have one TV? The one with a non-restrictive relative clause. Our TV, which is broken, is in the family room. We have more than one TV. Our TV, which is broken, is in the family room. Maybe our TV, which is not broken, our TV, which is still currently functioning, is in the bedroom. Now, let's take a look at the grammar explanations, and remember to do your online practice. First, let's take a look at subject and object relative clauses. Subject relative clauses. J.K. Rowling is the author. She wrote the Harry Potter books. J.K. Rowling is the author who wrote the Harry Potter books. Here we have who as a subject relative pronoun. It's a subject of the verb wrote. That's a VT, a verb that's transitive. And it has an object, books. Which books? The Harry Potter books. Who wrote? This word who refers back to the author, J.K. Rowling. Object relative clauses. She is the author. I have interviewed her. She is the author that I have interviewed. We can also say she is the author whom I have interviewed. And in informal speech, we can also say she is the author who I've interviewed. And later on, we'll talk about how we can omit that by saying she is the author I have interviewed. But here, let's go back to this example where we use the word that as the object pronoun. Subject I, verb have interviewed. That's a transitive verb. I have interviewed someone. I've interviewed the author. Replace that with the relative pronoun that. Object relative clauses with prepositions. She is the author. The committee gave an award to her. She is the author that the committee gave an award to. That the committee, subject, gave, verb, transitive, an award, direct object, to that person, indirect object. She is the author to whom the committee gave an award. These two sentences have exactly the same meaning, but look at the grammar. It's a little bit different. We have the relative pronoun that at the beginning of the clause and the preposition at the end of the clause. A more formal way to write that would be this way, to whom, so the preposition plus the word whom, the committee gave an award. So this one is more formal, and you'll see it more often in writing. Relative clauses are also called adjective clauses. Relative clauses, adjective clauses, same thing. Like adjectives, like single word adjectives, relative clauses modify nouns. Relative clauses define or explain or describe nouns and noun phrases. All right, so these clauses identify, defined. Take two, line 2. So these clauses identify, define, or comment on the noun that they follow. Let's try this page again with arrows. Relative clauses are also called adjective clauses. Like adjectives, relative clauses modify nouns. These clauses identify, define, or comment on the noun they follow. Relative clauses are dependent clauses. They cannot stand alone as independent sentences. They are dependent. They must go together with a main clause, with an independent clause. Relative clauses usually begin with a relative pronoun, for example, who or that. The relative pronoun and the modified noun refer to the same thing. For example, who and that in the previous examples means the author. Sentences with relative clauses can be thought of as a combination of two sentences, that is, as a shorter way of saying the same thing. Subject relative clauses. The relative pronoun takes the place of the subject of the clause. It's used instead of the subject of the clause. For example, she. It is followed by a verb. The verb agrees with the noun that the clause modifies. Object relative clauses. The relative pronoun takes the place of the object of the clause. For example, her. That's an object pronoun. It's followed by a subject plus a verb, and the verb agrees with the subject. Pay attention to what I said earlier about the inversion, where the object comes before the subject and verb. Object relative clauses with prepositions. The relative pronoun takes the place of the object of a preposition, not the direct object. That is, not the object of the verb, but the object of a preposition. Another example here is her. It's followed by a subject and a verb. The verb agrees with the subject, and the preposition usually appears at the end of the clause, but can also be put before the relative pronouns which or whom. Now let's talk about restrictive versus non-restrictive relative clauses. Do you remember studying this before? Let's review. Restrictive relative clauses. For example, my sister who lives in New York works for Donald Trump. That means I have more than one sister. Which sister works for Donald Trump? The one in New York, not the one in Texas. The car that I think changed the world was the Model T. That sentence is meaningless without the relative clause. Let's take away the relative clause and we have this dependent clause. The car was the Model T. Now that doesn't tell us very much information, does it? So we add the relative clause to modify car. That's the one that'll tell us more information. The car that I think changed the world was the Model T. So it defines or identifies the car. Without it, the sentence is meaningless. Now compare that with non-restrictive relative clauses. My sister, who lives in New York, works for Donald Trump. This kind of sentence, which differs in punctuation as well as intonation when we speak it, implies that I have only one sister. So if I say, my sister works for Donald Trump, you won't ask me which sister. You'll know that I have just one sister. And additional information, yeah, she lives in New York, but not necessary to understand which person I'm talking about. The Model T, which Ford produced from 1908 to 1927 was the first affordable car. Now let's suppose we take away the relative clause and we say just, the Model T was the first affordable car. Do we know which car? Yes, we know it's the Model T. So the sentence is still meaningful even if the clause is omitted. In other words, this clause does not restrict the noun Model T. It's additional information, but it's not necessary for us to understand which was the first affordable car. So these charts, these preceding charts, have addressed the most common kind of relative clause, called a restrictive or defining relative clause. This kind of clause answers the question, which one? It's used to identify one noun and distinguish it from other similar nouns. The information in the restrictive relative clause is necessary to make the meaning of the sentence clear. So let's go over that again. A restrictive relative clause is the kind of relative clause that's necessary for us to understand which one, which sister, or which car. It helps define that sister or that car. It has no commas. There's another kind of relative clause called a non-restrictive or non-defining or non-essential relative clause. This kind of clause adds extra information to the noun you're talking about, but the information in the clause is not necessary. It's not essential. It can be omitted, and the meaning of the sentence is still understandable. These kinds of clauses are less frequently used and occur mainly in writing. Why is that? Because in spoken language, we tend to speak in shorter sentences that are less complex and don't require things like commas in them. But in written language, we tend to make longer sentences, more complex sentences, because we can see them and the punctuation helps us understand the meaning. So, restrictive relative clauses are common in both spoken and written English, but non-restrictive relative clauses are more common in writing. Non-restrictive relative clauses are used after proper nouns. Proper nouns, remember proper nouns versus common nouns? So they're used after proper nouns and other specific or unique nouns. For example, my mother, that's unique. I only have one mother. My mother, who lives in Texas. Now this has to be a non-restrictive relative clause because I have only one mother. I cannot have more than one mother. So you see, this one must have a comma. And when we say it in spoken English, we change the tone to be lower. My mother, who lives in Texas, works for so-and-so. Now here's an example where we have a proper noun Model T. The Model T, which Ford produced from 1908 to 1927, was the first affordable car. So this one is an example of a proper noun. Non-restrictive relative clauses are always offset by commas. That means there are commas on both sides of the clause. They can be used only with the pronouns who, whom, or which. You cannot use that or omit the relative pronoun. So you can see here's an error. My mother, that lives in Texas. That's no good. You have to write my mother, who lives in Texas, sells real estate. You cannot omit the relative pronoun, as in this mistake. The Model T Ford produced from 1908 to 1927. You must write and say the Model T, which Ford produced from 1908 to 1927 was the first affordable car. Now let's talk about omitting the relative pronoun. In object-relative clauses, the relative pronoun is optional. You can say, these are the documents that you need to enter the country. So let's analyze the grammar of the relative clause. The subject is you. The verb is need. You need something. You need documents. You need documents. You need, here's the word that refers back to the word documents. These are the documents that you need to enter the country. Because it's an object, the English grammar rule says you can omit this. You can say, you can write, these are the documents you need to enter the country. These are the documents you need to enter the country. Here's another one. You can ask anyone that I spoke to. You can ask anyone whom I spoke to. You can ask anyone who I spoke to, or leave it out completely. You can ask anyone I spoke to. I, subject, spoke, transitive or intransitive. Can you identify this verb? Is it transitive or intransitive? It's intransitive. How do you know that? Because there's no noun, there's no direct object after the word spoke. Instead, there's a preposition. I spoke to a person. I spoke to many people. You can ask anyone that I spoke to. You'll hear this form very often in spoken English. You can also hear, you can ask anyone I spoke to. So you can omit the object relative pronoun. Here's a third example. Kate is the woman who I told you about that I met on vacation. Here we have two relative clauses. Who I told you about is one. That I met on vacation is another. So they're two relative clauses, and they refer back to the same person or the same noun, woman. I told you about a woman. I met a woman. All right, so can we omit this one? Yes, we can say Kate is the woman I told you about that I met on vacation. This one you need to keep, but this one you can omit. Kate is the woman I told you about that I met on vacation. In object-relative clauses, the relative pronoun can be omitted with no change in meaning. This is also true in object-relative clauses ending with a preposition, like this one. This is very common in everyday speech. When there are two object-relative clauses in a row, the first relative pronoun is usually omitted, but the second one cannot be omitted. That's here, this example. You cannot drop the relative pronoun in subject-relative clauses, so you must be careful and understand the grammatical relationship between the words in a clause. The lecture was given by a professor who lived is okay, but the lecture was given by a professor who lived in Tibet for almost, that's not right. So you keep the word who, the professor who lived in Tibet. You must keep it because it's the subject of the verb who. It's only permissible to omit the relative pronoun if it serves as an object of the verb or object of a preposition in the relative clause. But it's not permissible to drop the relative pronoun in subject relative clauses. Got that? What about some other relative pronouns? Restrictive relative clauses. Here are some examples. She is the author whose books have won many awards. Here's the word whose. It's possessive. Books is a noun, so it means the author's books. We write an apostrophe the author of apostrophe S books when we use this noun. However, when we use the pronoun whose, be careful not to mix it up with another word that sounds the same and has an apostrophe. This pronoun is spelled W-H-O-S-E. Remember that spelling. She's the author whose books have won many awards. So books is the subject, have won is the verb, many awards is the object. Second example, it was a time when I didn't have any money. Here we have a relative adverb that begins the relative clause. Subject I, verb didn't have, object any money. And it means during a particular period of time. It means the same as it was a time during which I didn't have any money. I didn't have any money during that time. So, during which is a prepositional phrase which we can use. It was a time during which I didn't have any money. But many times we take the prepositional phrase and change it to a time word when. It was a time when I didn't have any money. Let's look at how the word where is used. I often pass by the street where you used to live. You know, you used to live on a particular street, on that street. So I could say on that street. I could say, I often pass by the street on which you used to live. But instead of using this prepositional phrase, I can use the relative adverb where. I often pass by the street where you used to live. Subject you. Used to live is a verb that's intransitive, so it doesn't have a direct object. It's followed by prepositional phrase on that street, or here we're using the relative adverb where to indicate this prepositional phrase. I know the reason why the workers went on strike. Why the workers went on strike describes the reason. Subject, the workers. Verb, went on strike. You know what it means to go on strike? It means they stopped working because of a particular reason, oftentimes for better working conditions or higher salary. They went on strike. The workers went on strike for a reason. So the word why means the reason that. We can also express the sentence, I know the reason that the workers went on strike. So we can use the word that, or we can use the word why to mean the same thing. Non-restrictive relative clauses. Modify words that we already know, people that we already know. So here's an example of a proper noun, the name of an author. J.K. Rowling, whose books are all bestsellers, donates a lot of money to charity. Non-restrictive relative clauses can be omitted and we'll still understand who. So we take this one out and we say J.K. Rowling donates a lot of money to charity, and we still know who the author is and who the person is. This is not essential information. And we set it off by putting 2 commas, one before and one after the relative clause. I can't pay rent until next week when I get my paycheck in the mail. When I get my paycheck in the mail is non-restrictive. It's not essential for us to understand when. When can you pay your rent? I can't pay until next week. Next week is quite clear. So this information is extra. It's additional and it's non-essential. Therefore, we set it off with a comma just before it. After it, we have a period because that's the end of a sentence. When I visit Taipei, where I used to live, I make sure to buy some of my favorite tea. Taipei is the name of a city in Taiwan. It's a proper noun. where I used to live, is extra information. It's not essential for us to understand which city. So we take it out. We have, when I visit Taipei, I make sure to buy some of my favorite tea. And we still know where you go to get your tea. So this, where I used to live, is a non-restrictive relative clause. Some object relative clauses can begin with other relative pronouns. For example, whose, when, where, and why. Restrictive relative clauses, whose, shows a possessive relationship between the nouns before and after it. When can be used as a relative pronoun when it follows words like time, month, or year. Where follows words like place, city, street, and situation. You can use why after the noun reason, the reason why. Non-restrictive relative clauses, whose, when, and where, can also be used in these clauses. Unlike their use in restrictive relative clauses, when and where can follow specific times. For example, last summer when da 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 da, or place names. For example, Taipei, where da 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 da.